Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Acherei Mot, but today we are remembering the Shoah. Nearly 2,000 years ago, in the year 70, and also from 132 to 134, the Roman Empire aimed to obliterate the nation of Israel, the people of God. After 70, having put an end to our rebellion with destruction and considerable bloodshed, they exiled most of us from our homes, although Jews have always been present in various parts of Haaretz. The last 2 1/3 tribes, and many from among the other 10 tribes who remained in the land, suffered an ultimate defeat at the hands of the mighty Roman Empire in 134 to 135. Jerusalem and the temple had been destroyed in 70, and a new city called Capitolina was built by the Romans on this site. The area was renamed Palestina after Israel's long-dead enemies, the Philistines, who were probably of Phoenician origin, related to those in Tyre and Sidon. In an attempt to eradicate even the remembrance of Israel, Rome endeavored to expunge all reference to Jerusalem and Judea, to Israel and to Jews, as if we never existed. Jews, including the many followers of Mashiach Yeshua, were sold as slaves on the slave markets of the world. Our people went into a long night of exile in all the lands of the Mediterranean and beyond, scattered literally to the 4 corners of the earth. For nearly 2,000 years, we have been the wanderers of the world, homeless and landless, for the most part without rights or advocates. Wherever we have gone or been driven, forced assimilation or death have often been the only choices. Even when we became assimilated and prosperous, as in 15th century Spain and Portugal, and in 20th century Germany, anti-Semitism has slithered out of its dark, slimy abode, encouraged by man's evil inclination and Hasatan. We have always been, as one of my university professors, Rabbi Roger Hurst, liked to say, indigestible. Yechezkel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones is a heart-rending, agonizing, and deeply disturbing illustration of our people some 80 years ago. The bones Yechezkel was shown were scattered. They were unburied and very dry, representing those who had been slain. Harogim means murdered, not merely dead. Their vital force, represented by bones and marrow, is dried up. God asked the prophet somewhat ironically, "Can these bones live?" Yechezkel answers that such a thing is humanly impossible. However, God tells him to prophesy to the bones and over the bones. "Behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and will bring flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord. So Yechezkel says, I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I prophesied, there was noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together. And when I beheld, the sinews and flesh came upon them above, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy unto the wind, and say to the wind, thus says the Lord God, come from the four winds, O wind, and breathe upon these slain, that they might live. And the breath came into them, and they lived, and stood up upon their feet, an exceeding great army. The word for breath, spirit, and wind is the same. So we have here a play on words. But God describes these bones as the whole house of Israel, a people who had all but lost hope. And realistically, our people had no means of ever regaining our land or our nationhood. Maybe when Mashiach came, that's what my grandparents' generation longed for and waited for. But God made remarkable promises to Israel, his covenant people, promises of national resurrection and an end to exile, restoration to the land which he gave to our ancestors in perpetuity. He also promised to make a renewed covenant with Israel. God's ruach, breath, wind, spirit, would be placed within us. This prophetic word to Yechezkel would come about for a specific reason. And this is the reason: so that the Goyim shall know that I, the Lord, sanctify Israel. The full name of the day which commemorates the Holocaust is Yom HaShoah V'Hagei Vurah. Shoah literally means whirlwind, but in this context is translated as catastrophe. So the full name means the day of remembrance of the catastrophe and heroism. It's observed on the 27th of Nisan, this year the 7th of May, a week before Yom HaZikaron, the memorial day for Israel's fallen soldiers. Yom HaShoah marks the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and many acts of incredible sacrifice and courage. The date was selected by the Knesset and formalized by Israeli law on August 19th, 1953. It is commemorated by Jewish communities and individuals worldwide, and it is specific to the Shoah, unlike the so-called Holocaust Memorial Day in the UK, celebrating all kinds of so-called Holocausts. The Shoah is unique in the annals of human history. Never in the history of humankind has a plan to annihilate an entire people been created and executed by a nation against those with whom they were not at war, people they sought out for death even beyond their own borders. The Shoah was intended by the evil men who contrived it around an impressive conference table in a large upper-middle-class home in a tree-lined suburb of Wannsee outside Berlin as the final solution to the Jewish question, the Jewish problem. In order to break the chain of Jewish generations going back to Abraham and Sarah. Today, Jewish family reunions are often small because there are so many members missing. Cousins, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who will never be. Although the Shoah did not succeed in its goal, it did erase as many as 4 generations in many families. Great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and children. Genealogical projects actively pursue lost members of Jewish families in centers like Israel's Yad Vashem. The name comes from the verse in Yeshayahu, "And to them I will give in my house, and within my walls a memorial and a name, a Yad Vashem, that shall not be cut off." Beit HaTfutzot, the Museum of the Diaspora at Tel Aviv University, and similar institutions around the world encourage the chain of Jewish continuity, forging it, reforging it for future generations. And of course, there are many Shoah narratives. Perhaps you've been touched by one in particular that you've read or seen, or by a survivor that you've met or with whom you have spoken. I knew quite a few of them growing up. Many have read books like The Diary of Anne Frank and Asylum by Moritz Scher, a survivor's experiences written as a journal. Movies such as Schindler's List, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and so many others touch our hearts, and they also make us angry. Documentaries, including personal interviews with survivors and death camp liberators, help us to comprehend the incomprehensible. And U.S. public television has done an excellent job in bringing us such documentaries on a regular, almost daily basis. My family's Shoah story was largely unknown until 1990. Until then, we had assumed that all of my grandfather Avraham's family had died in the Shoah. But in the most amazing way, I met Yitzchak Fleischer, my father's cousin, whose family lives in Hadera, Israel. He is the only one of my grandfather Avraham's family to survive the Shoah. The Shoah has many stories of survival. We read and hear of courage and victory over obstacles that are beyond our imagining. We read such narratives with awe, shaking our heads in disbelief that men and women and even children could endure so much and yet survive. But also that there could be so much hatred, viciousness, cruelty directed at us just because we're Jews. This hatred didn't end with the Shoah. I can tell you that anti-Semitism is alive and well in institutions in the UK, honored throughout the world under a variety of titles such as anti-Islamophobia, war on the so-called Palestinians, and Holocaust denial. Only a few years ago, a pamphlet arrived through my letterbox detailing the dastardly crimes of the Jews and even the notorious blood libel is still around and believed. And now with the war begun by Hamas, hatred against Jews is increasing exponentially on university campuses, on the streets, everywhere, and not only here, but around the world. However, in the lifetime of all of us, specific prophecy has been fulfilled as God keeps his promises to his chosen people. Israel became a nation again nearly 76 years ago in 1948. Perhaps you remember when Jerusalem was unified in 1967. I do. And we've all witnessed the ongoing, continuous attacks on Israel. And from 1948 to the present, we have seen enemies defeated with God's help. The latest miracle occurred when Saudi Arabia and the Emirates leaked intel about Iran's plans to bomb Israel to the US and UK, who, along with Israel, took on Iran, destroying almost all their weaponry harmlessly. Yes, we are living in the days the prophets themselves anticipated. God is restoring our people to the land which he gave to us eternally. He has ended the exile, bringing our people back from the four corners of the globe, literally from everywhere, including most recently from Ethiopia and India. He's opened the doors of those nations which seemed not that long ago to be permanently closed, such as those in the USSR. He is restoring those who have lost even their identity as Jews, as many from among the conversos of Spanish and Portuguese heritage returned to their identity as Jews. Conversos were those who were forced to convert to Roman Catholicism in Spain and Portugal and in the Americas, or be expelled. This return is miraculous. It is unprecedented. Never before in history has a people been repatriated to their own land and identity. The miracle extends to Israel's physical prosperity and economic success. The desert, which has been barren during our absence. You have only to read accounts of the last few hundred years. Blooms with plantations and farms using hydroponics, desalination, and other amazing means to irrigate what for others has been dry, infertile soil. And you have only to look across at Jordan to see exactly what it used to look like. Abandoned cities like Ashdod and Ashkelon, the cities that used to belong to the Philistines, have been rebuilt. Israel leads the Middle East in technology, science, and medicine, with which it has blessed the world, despite the fact that the oil-rich nations surrounding Israel have such vast wealth, and Israel is forced to invest so much in defense as well as in repatriating new immigrants. But God said through the prophet Zechariah, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the peoples. I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all peoples. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut to pieces, though all the nations of the earth gather together against it." Jerusalem is of international interest and concern. A cup of trembling to the nations of the world, its future debated in the UN, which has long since shown its true face in regard to Israel. Israel is the center of international controversy and political strife. Leading politicians around the world are all longing for the opportunity to put things right according to their own agendas and for the benefit of a people which does not exist and never has existed. They speak of a two-state solution when a Palestinian state already exists, created from 3/4 of the British Mandatory Territory. That nation? Jordan. The prophet Yoel tells us that an outpouring of God's Ruach specifically upon his Jewish people will occur before Mashiach returns, after Israel's physical resurrection, Yechezkel 37, after God has restored our people to our own land, when he is in the process of restoring the land itself. We read these words, "Fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for the Lord will do great things. Be not afraid, beasts of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness spring up, for the tree bears fruit, the fig tree and the vine yield their strength. Be glad then, children of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given you the early rain moderately, and he will cause to come down for you the rain, the early rain and the latter rain. And the floor shall be full of wheat, and shall overflow with wine and oil. And I will restore to you the years the locust has eaten." This prophecy began to be fulfilled during the late 1960s in the spiritual revival amongst Jews, which led many to acknowledge Yeshua as Mashiach. This is the early rain described in Devarim 30, verse 1 through 3. "And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon you, the blessings and the curse, which I have set before you, and you shall call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and shall return unto the Lord your God and obey his voice, according to all that I command you this day, you and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul, that then the Lord your God will turn your captivity and have compassion upon you." Jewish revival and renewal will come to full fruition when all Israel shall be saved, as Rav Shaul declared in Romans 11. Have they stumbled with the result that they have permanently fallen away? God forbid. Quite the contrary. It is by means of their stumbling that salvation came to the Goyim in order to provoke them to jealousy. Moreover, if their stumbling is bringing riches to the world, how much greater riches will Israel in its fullness bring them? It is that stoniness to a degree has come upon Israel until the world of the Goyim enters in its fullness, and that in this way that all Israel will be saved, for God's free gifts and calling are irrevocable. What of the future? Well, the prophets wrote down God's prophetic plan for our future. Through Yirmiyahu we learn, "Behold, the days come, said the Lord, I will sow the house of Israel with the seed of man and beast. Behold, the days come, said the Lord, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Yehudah, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. But this shall be the covenant that I shall make with the house of Israel. After those days, said the Lord, I will put my Torah in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. For I will forgive them their iniquity and remember their sin no more. God promises to bring to full fruition what he began thousands of years ago with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yisrael, a renewed, unconditional covenant with Israel, his chosen nation. These specific prophecies will be fulfilled in the end of days. Israel will be fully resurrected and restored to the land of promise, a land given to us by God, not by the UN or any nation or human being. This will happen at a time when Israel has been prepared by God to be spiritually revived. All Israel shall be saved. We will recognize Yeshua as Mashiach and will declare, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, just prior to Yeshua's return. God is regathering many from among our people who have been lost to their identity, and some are finding it now within covenant Judaism. Jews by choice and by conversion, Gerim from among the nations, demonstrate the truth of God's word concerning this end-time move of the Ruach HaElohim, as they claim the right to be restored to their spiritual roots in God's truth. Israel, once thought to be dead and buried, a fossil nation, according to British historian and philosopher Arnold Toynbee, has been revived and resurrected by the power of the one and only God. Where is Toynbee today? Although we may face great difficulties and trials in the days ahead, as anti-Semitism continues to grow around us, we should be reminded always that God's plans for his people will come to fruition and that he is with us. As we remember the Shoah, we must be faithful to stand with our people and for the God of Israel today in the face of increasing attacks. Steven Spielberg said recently, if you're a Jew today, in fact, if you're any person who believes in the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom and free expression, you know that like many other groups, we are once again facing the perennial demons of intolerance. Deniers of the Holocaust and those who would like to see it forgotten might be surprised to learn that God is keeping a record of every act and plan against his people. One day, Adolf Hitler, his associates, including the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amim al-Husseini, and their cohorts, Yasser Arafat, Abdul Gamal Nasser, and all those who followed them, along with those of all time who have sought our destruction, will face the eternal judge and will be consigned to the place of eternal torment prepared for the eternal hater of Israel, Hasatan. Our prayer today: O righteous God who searches minds and hearts, end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous secure. Tehillim 7:9. May Mashiach return soon and in our day. Shabbat Shalom.